Talking all things SEC here on SEC Unfiltered with our good friend Cole Bryson over at the Fan Upstate down there in South Carolina around Chris Phillips' territory. You can check him out weekdays from 3 to 7, covers Clemson, Gamecocks, and a whole lot more. Cole, good to have you on, man. How are you today?
I'm good, man. Good to be with you. Always exciting talking South Carolina football.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and get into this. You guys come off the loss against LSU, a game that really you should have had, and you should be looking at 4-0 going to Ole Miss in a couple of weeks. Talk to me about just recapping 2 weeks ago. Just did LaNorris Sellers' injury basically derail any chance of a victory, or was the gifts just given to LSU a bit too much?
You know, I think it can be a combination of several factors. I do think that if LaNorris Sellers plays the entire game, right, if he doesn't get injured, I think South Carolina wins that football game. The way that he was playing in the first half, especially, man, that they were feeling themselves. And you know what? With LaNorris Sellers, I said this coming into the season. This offense may not be statistically what it was in 2023 or 2022 with Spencer Rattler. However, I do think when you look at the statistics, the box scores, right, of game in, game out, week in and week out, you can't always use those statistics as everything. I believe that South Carolina's offense may be more efficient at times. Efficiency doesn't always equate to having the best statistics, each and every game. I think LaNorris Sellers, if he were to have played the entire game, absolutely, I think South Carolina wins that game. And then to your point, obviously the officials were a part of it. Again, South Carolina still did have a 17-point lead, but I think LaNorris Sellers and what he adds to the offense, his ability to run, as well as the passing game, which I think you were starting to see improvement on in that first half against LSU. I think that when he is the guy, and this offense is starting to fill themselves and get receivers involved, like we saw in that first half, I think they are a very good football team, especially when you pair them with that elite defense.
Do you think that offensive play calling is an issue with Dowell Loggins in the play? Does he need to be let go after the season, or does Shane Beamer need to take over play calling? What needs to change for the offense, especially with a young roster, just to get them comfortable as they enter the gauntlet of SEC play?
Yeah, I think offensive play calling is a bigger part of it than people want to point out, right? Now, I'm not saying that Shane Beamer needs to take over play calling. However, I'm not a fan of Dowell Loggins. That may ruffle feathers, and I'm okay with that because Dowell Loggins, if you look statistically, he's never been the best. Even in the NFL, he wasn't before he moved to a tight ends coach. South Carolina's offense right now, before last weekend, it was the second worst in the SEC. I think Dowell Loggins is a big part of the issue when you look at their offense. I do believe that LaNorris Sellers and Dowell Loggins will get better as the season goes on. However, I haven't been a fan since the hire, and he hasn't done anything as of yet to change my mind. You just sometimes scratch your head and throw the Akron game out on Saturday because they're playing Akron, right? In my opinion, not a good game tape to look at and be able to actually judge, the performance and the play calling. Go back one game prior to LSU and even before that against Kentucky. I think at times that Dowell Loggins overcomplicates things. I do want to see better offensive play calling, whether it's a change at the offensive coordinator position or it's Dowell Loggins doing something a little bit different. When I talk to South Carolina fans, I have yet to find many that are pleased with Dowell Loggins as play caller. So in order for them to get to where they want to be this year, and if that's a bowl game or even further than that, they've got to have more efficiency on offense when it comes to LaNorris Sellers obviously being on the field. That's very important. That's an important factor of their success. But I believe Dowell Loggins has to be better as well.
Like you mentioned already, yeah, Robbie Ashford goes out against Akron and puts up almost 400 yards by himself, which is impressive. But again, you're playing Akron. And if you look statistically what he did last year with Auburn and Hugh Freeze's offense in the brief moments that he played, you didn't really see a whole lot from him. You looked at how he performed against LSU's defense, who was god-awful last year. and he didn't really do anything. And you would think against a really struggling defense like how LSU had last year, maybe you would have some form of success. No, he really didn't have any at all. And if I mentioned this in our overreaction week video that'll be dropping pretty soon, I told fans, just enjoy Robbie Ashford for how he performed last week for about a day or two, and then enjoy the bye week, and then go back to preparing and hoping that LaNorris Sellers gets to play. Because if you put Robbie Ashford in against Ole Miss, he's going to get killed. You've got a weak offensive line that has really hindered you throughout the season, and it probably is one of the reasons why LaNorris Sellers got hurt, because if you don't have him scrambling so much, he doesn't really have to escape outside the pocket, and he can really deliver on a dime. And that's no disrespect to his dual threat capability, because he's well able to do all of that. But if you take out the fact that South Carolina has a bad offensive line, this could actually be a stout offense. And I think it goes back to the recruiting landscape and how South Carolina has had a lot of hit and misses with offensive line play as well.
Yeah, offensive lines. Listen, that's definitely a big part of it, right? I'll say this: last year, a year ago, 2023, South Carolina was terribly unfortunate when it came to the health of their offensive line, right? Do you put some of that on the play as well? Sure. They bring in Sean Elliott, who's not officially the offensive line coach, but helps with the offensive line. They have guys healthy as of right now, have gotten a little bit better, in my opinion, at the offensive line. But no, going back to your point, I don't think it's fair to put a lot of stock on the Robbie Ashford and Akron game. You have to take it for what it is, right? They're playing Akron. Akron was not a good football team. And the best case scenario going into that game, I said all week, was South Carolina wins and wins big. Robbie Ashford plays well enough to win the game, and you don't have any other injuries, right? LaNorris Sellers didn't play. Rocket Sanders, I think, took one snap on Saturday. So your best case scenario ended up playing out just the way you needed it. You got the win. You stayed healthy. And, boy, it seems as if this bye week couldn't have come at a better time for South Carolina. I really like where they're going headed into the bye week. I really do. I think that if you look at, the 3-1 start, I believe 99% of South Carolina Gamecock fans would have taken a 3-1 start if you asked them prior to the season starting, right? Hey, here's the 3-1 start opportunity. And in the one loss against LSU, you were up 17, you played really well, and you lost due to multiple factors. But the biggest, in my opinion, was due to LaNorris Sellers being injured. So with all that being said, I like where they are. This bye week is crucial because they have an extra week to prepare for a very good Ole Miss team. We know what Ole Miss is going to bring to the table. And you know what? The ultimate test is going to be in 2 weeks. And when they do go play Ole Miss, because that's going to be a little bit better of a judgment in terms of where this South Carolina team is and where they can be the rest of the season in 2024.
What has the fan perception been of Dowell Loggins? I know you had to replace a guy like Marcus Satterfield, who's now at Nebraska coaching Dylan Raiola and company. Their offenses look good. It seems to me after 2021, despite the offensive struggles, 22 was a good building blocks to build off of. And I think if you kept Satterfield in South Carolina for another year, you really would have had a chance to really have a breakout year last year. But you bring in a guy like Dowell Loggins, like you've already mentioned. Fans may have a different opinion of him, but when you look statistically, it's hard to point out that you were 12th last year in the SEC in points per game, last in rushing yards a game, and then so far you're one of the worst offensive teams in the SEC. Regardless of what you've done the last 2 games, you really haven't shown a whole lot. So do you think that if you're Shane Beamer, you're thinking, man, we really just let a really good offensive coordinator, one that was starting to improve, really kind of let him go? Do you think he regrets that decision, or is it kind of one of those things where you just got a next man up mentality?
Well, at the end of the day, I don't believe Shane Beamer had much to do with it, right? When you look at the money and the situation that Satterfield went to, like you talked about, it is a little bit different of a situation. And the struggle in the SEC is to not only build an elite coaching staff, but keeping an elite coaching staff, right? Like, that's what people don't understand. Keeping elite coaches in the Southeastern Football Conference, that is easier said than done. And that's why I give like Dabo Swinney, a lot of credit for keeping Brent Venables around, as long as he did before he went to Oklahoma, and now Oklahoma in the SEC. I think that you see coaching staffs at the highest level, like the Ole Misses, like the Georgias, and the, let's say, Alabamas, for example, they're able to stay together for different reasons, right? South Carolina is not to at a point of being able to be elite enough or competitive enough year in and year out to keep, retain those coaches that are so important to that staff. And yeah, I think losing Satterfield did set them back a little bit. 2023 was not a good year for South Carolina. And you mentioned 2022, they got better as the season went on in 2022. They didn't have a great start. They had a really bad loss early in the year, 2022, but as the season went on, they improve each week, and then they go beat Tennessee, actually score, 50 plus points on Tennessee, and then the very next week turn around and beat Clemson. And just had a fantastic ending to the 2022 season. And as you mentioned, losing Satterfield in 2023, obviously it looks as if the offense took a step back. I don't know. I said it a million times coming into the season. LaNorris Sellers isn't going to be the statistics quarterback, the high stats quarterback that you had in Spencer Rattler. Spencer Rattler was able to put up the numbers, right? He was able to use his arm and really put up impressive numbers as South Carolina's quarterback, even with a horrible offensive line last year. He did all of that with one of the league's worst offensive lines. So you may not see the same statistics from LaNorris Sellers, and I don't believe you will. However, if they can find what works and he can stay healthy and they can get enough each week from Rocket Sanders, who is one of the best running backs in the SEC, I think the efficiency will be there.
Cole Bryson of the Fan Upstate joining us here on SEC Unfiltered. Want to give a shout out to our good friends over at Prize Picks. Going over to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app on your Android or Apple device and use code SECU at initial sign up to get $50 instantly when you play that first $5 or more lineup. So in the month of September, for the rest of it, they have free square September, so you can lock in a win every week of September if Caleb Williams throws for at least just 1 yard. So go on over and take advantage of that and use code SECU when you play that first $5 or more lineup for $50 in free bets. Oh, I want to get to more of – let's just get away from the offensive side of the ball for South Carolina. Let's talk about the strength. Let's talk about Clayton White's defense. I think Clayton White's been one of the most underrated defensive coordinators over the course of his tenure at South Carolina. You go back to his first year whenever this was supposed to be an underachieving defense, and you look at how they performed. They had many injuries. They had a lot of people that you lost to graduation, the portal, and then you end up tying Notre Dame in forced turnovers. You had one of the top defenses in all of college football. You've been consistently a top 50 defense since that era. Is it time to give Clayton White his props and potentially get him another head coaching opportunity within the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, you hope not if you're a South Carolina Gamecock fan, right? Because going back to the conversation we just had, the struggle in the SEC is keeping really good coaches, not only acquiring them, but keeping them. And, Clayton White, he is a very good defensive coordinator. To your point, I believe South Carolina fans should be very fortunate that he's still there. I've heard from other people at other programs that Clayton White doesn't interview well, and I don't know if there's any truth to that or not, but I'll tell you this. If you're South Carolina and you're a Gamecock fan, you better hope he never interviews well, right? You better hope it stays that way because he has brought really good success to this South Carolina defense. And look, they've got dudes this year, man. Like, not only do they have dudes, they have depth. Shane Beamer was so excited going into the season about the depth that South Carolina had. I mean, they're able to rotate almost twice as many guys in and out of the defense compared to last year when they just didn't have the depth. And then you add in a guy, like Dylan Stewart, and obviously being on the level that Dylan Stewart is, that'll improve any defense, right? He's fantastic. In my opinion, he's one of the best, if not the best, at his position in his class in the entire country. He's the real deal. So, no, to your point, and to answer your question, South Carolina fans should hope that Clayton White never becomes a head coach because they have a really solid defensive coordinator in Columbia right now. And you know what? He will be, in my opinion, interviewing for head coaching jobs this offseason. And if South Carolina fans are fortunate, they can keep him around. But that's the thing, man. We just talked about it with offensive coordinator, right? Satterfield leaving. And now you have Clayton White, who's shown really good success. You just hope and pray that whatever happens, that, you know, whatever's causing him not to get those big jobs continues to happen, because you don't want him leaving. Again, I go back to consistency and keeping the same staff on the field for South Carolina. One of the biggest things with success at college football is having staffs that are not only elite, but having the ability to keep them there longer than 2 to 3 years, right? You've got to build consistency. You've got to build, continuity. I think those are two very important things. And you know what? I don't know what kind of money Clayton White will demand as DC, but I think you'll get a pay raise if he stays in Columbia. He's absolutely worth the money, and has been a very big part of South Carolina's success this year.
Has the mantra about South Carolina changed since the opening week? I know a lot of people were thinking, okay, this is going to be the worst team in the SEC. And then you look over the course of the last 3 games, and it's like, well, we've improved quite a bit since the opening game. And I think it was just opening game jitters for both sides of the ball. You made mistakes, and over the course of the time, Kentucky was really your breakout game. And you really dominated them on the defensive side of the ball. And we know about the offensive struggles, despite only putting up I think they put up, under 250 yards of total offense against Kentucky. But you start to see how this defense can bail you out of a lot of situations. If you can get takeaways on a consistent basis, which is the mantra of a Clayton White defense, if you can force turnovers, if you can consistently put pressure on quarterbacks, you're going to have an opportunity to get back to a bowl game. In all likelihood, lighten the load of Shane Beamer's seat getting a bit hotter as the season has progressed. Because I thought that they should have fired him at the end of the year back after that first week. Now I think it's kind of cooled down a bit. How has it been so far around y'all's area?
No, it's a good point. After the Old Dominion game, there wasn't a lot to brag about, right? It was kind of a just an overwhelming, not really sure. Gamecock fans not really sure what to think after the Old Dominion game. I was there. Look, they got the win. However, things got hairy, right? I remember sitting in the press box in the fourth quarter of that game when Old Dominion had the lead, looking around, talking to colleagues of mine, thinking, man, this could be bad, right? This could be Citadel loss bad several years ago. So, yeah, it started a little hairy. However, when you are able to, I said this on Twitter a few weeks back, the SEC, man, it's a great conference when you look at it from the ability of, or from the standpoint of, you have the ability to change the narrative week in and week out based on what you do. So South Carolina starts the season with a subpar performance against Old Dominion. The very next week in the SEC, opening the conference games, they go on the road. They beat Kentucky. They're the only team in the SEC that's 1-0, right? They go on the road and beat a Kentucky team who Kentucky used to have South Carolina's number. Carolina fans expect to beat Kentucky year in and year out. So after that, you look at that as a big win. I don't care how bad Kentucky is or how good they are. And look, when you're in the SEC and you can go week in and week out and win games on the road, I'm never going to apologize for a win on the road in the SEC. And the very next week, you showed that you can compete with a very good LSU team. South Carolina fans obviously disappointed with the way it ended, and they should have been. I know people don't want to talk about the officials, but they were a part of the issue, in my opinion. So, yeah, the mantra's changed, to answer your question. And you got the Akron game, behind you. The bye week could not have come at a better time. I believe South Carolina, with this bye week, will be able to take a fresh approach, right? Based on what they've done well, based on what they need to do better. There are still a lot of things they can do better. However, when you look at who they're playing in 2 weeks from now, or less than 2 weeks, rather, we know that they're going to have to improve and improve fast, especially on the offense side of the ball. And they're going to have LaNorris Sellers healthy, because everyone believes that the defense, Clayton White's defense, will be able to keep them in games. However, at the end of the day, when you're playing the Ole Misses of the world, when you're playing the Alabamas of the world, your offense at some point in time is going to have to go down, put together a nice 75-yard drive and go put together a fourth quarter drive that, gives you a chance to win the game. South Carolina was unable to do that very thing against LSU. A lot of that had to do with the penalties and Robbie Ashford being at QB1. However, at some point, even against the teams like Ole Miss, I do think the defense will keep them in the game, but the offense is going to have to go show up, and they're going to have to make some big plays down the stretch. South Carolina knows they're a good team. However, they're about to find out just how good they are.
I think when I look at the last 5 games of the regular season in the month of November, that is make or break if you're South Carolina. If you go 3-2 during that stretch, you're in a bowl game. You should have an easy win against Wofford, and then you have 4 toss-ups against Clemson, Missouri, Vandy, and Texas A&M. Vanderbilt has looked really good at times. They really should be 4-0. They should have had they had a horrible letdown against Georgia State. Special teams killed them against Missouri. And also with Missouri, they've looked vulnerable at times. The last 2 weeks, they've looked really, really inconsistent, especially with how they fared against mobile quarterbacks. Where do you see a stretch where if South Carolina is to lose these next 3 games, which according to ESPN looks likely, although I will say that Oklahoma game looks really interesting. If you finish the year at 3-2 and you make a bowl game, does Beamer's seat get a little bit cooler, or does it still around the same as it is right now?
It's a great question. I think South Carolina feels like they're in a spot right now where they have several coin flip games on the schedule. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because you look at the Ole Miss game, you look at the Alabama game, and you think, okay, those aren't coin flip games. South Carolina would have to have near perfection to win those games. However, when you look at the Texas A&Ms, when you look at the Clemson game, for example, right? Missouri is interesting. Missouri, Vandy should be a winnable game. But there are still several games on the schedule, even to your point about Oklahoma, who I would consider a coin flip game at the moment. I don't mean it's going to be 50-50. I'm just saying that these are games South Carolina will have a chance to win. Texas A&M, for example, and Oklahoma. Those are 2 games that South Carolina will be underdogs in. They'll be favored over Wofford. They'll also be underdogs against Clemson. They'll also be underdogs against Missouri. So when you look at those 4 games in particular, Clemson, Missouri, A&M, and Oklahoma, I believe South Carolina has shown through the first few weeks of college football season that they are capable of competing in those games. And, right now Clemson's humming. However, they're doing it against an ACC schedule. I believe South Carolina's defense will be good enough, as long as they stay healthy, to keep them in a lot of these games. So if you win 1 or 2 of those and you're able to make a bowl game, yeah, I think Shane Beamer's seat does cool down a little bit, because winning in the SEC, like I said, it's hard. And Shane Beamer has said it multiple times. He'll never apologize for close wins, whether it be against Old Dominion or against Kentucky or against Missouri, if they were to get that one later in the year. But I tell you this, man, based on what I've seen, I do believe South Carolina is going to get a game they're not supposed to, right? They're going to be underdogs in the majority of the games other than Vandy and Wofford. They'll be underdogs the rest of the year. Of putting those 2 games aside, when you look at the other opponents, I think the Gamecocks will get a game or 2 that they're not supposed to, and one of those could be at home against A&M a little bit later in the year. Oklahoma, to your point, I look at it right now as a winnable game. So we'll see. I just think that at the end of the year, we all know what Ole Miss is. We all know what Alabama is. But if South Carolina can upset 1 or 2, that would be a huge win. Making a bowl game, you win that bowl game, potentially 7 wins. Absolutely, that's a successful year for South Carolina.
I think also when you mentioned earlier about keeping a guy like Clayton White, it also helps with the transfer portal landscape. I think that if you keep a guy like Dylan Stewart in South Carolina for another year or 2, holy cow, you're getting 2 years of arguably the most dominant edge rusher since Jadeveon Clowney. And wow, that is amazing for me to say, because there's been a stretch between what Jadeveon Clowney did and in between of what other edge rushers that came from South Carolina did. And it's hard to find another guy that was as dominant already in his freshman year other than what Jadeveon Clowney did so far. So I'm not saying that Dylan Stewart's the next Jadeveon Clowney. I'm not saying that he will be the next Jadeveon Clowney. But is there even any sort of comparison when it comes to an edge rusher like that?
You know, the great thing, in my opinion, is Dylan Stewart doesn't have to be the next Jadeveon Clowney, right? Like, Jadeveon Clowney, good luck finding another one.
He's in a class by himself.
He's in a class by himself. In the next 100 years, right? Good luck finding another Jadeveon. I say it again. I don't think Dylan Stewart needs to be Jadeveon. I think Dylan Stewart needs to be the best version of himself. And if he's that, South Carolina, listen, they'll love him. And I was in Columbia this past Saturday, and I saw Jadeveon Clowney's name up on the stadium, and you just think, man, what he did for the university. You're right. If they can keep Dylan Stewart around, maybe his name will be up there one day as well, if he can have the same impact that Clowney did. However, something we had talked about in the world of transfer portal and NIL, keeping a guy like Dylan Stewart's easier said than done. South Carolina's going to have to be very competitive financially to keep a guy like that, because he's going to get other offers. There's going to be people wanting to throw a lot of money at him. So, yeah, to your point, if they can keep a guy like that for the next year or two, watch out, because that defense could have a chance to be really, really good.
Cole Bryson of the Fan Upstate, host of Wire to Wire. You can check him and the Diesel out from 3 to 7 Eastern time around the South Carolina area. Cole, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. You can check him out at the Fan Upstate, also at the Cole Bryson. Cole, it's been a pleasure having you on, my man. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and let's have a great start to week 5, my man.
Appreciate you, man. Let's do it again soon.